The year was 371 BCE, and the morning sun cast long shadows across the plains of Boeotia. For centuries, one name had struck fear into the hearts of enemies across the Greek world: Sparta. The warriors who had held Thermopylae, who had crushed Athens, who had never known defeat in open battle, were about to face an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. What happened on this July day would shatter the myth of Spartan invincibility forever and reshape the balance of power in ancient Greece. The clash that was about to unfold wasn't just another battle, it was the collision of two vastly different philosophies of warfare, two incompatible visions of Greek supremacy, and two military systems that had evolved along completely different paths. On one side stood the most feared army in the ancient world, disciplined beyond measure and hardened by generations of conquest. On the other, an innovative force that would revolutionize warfare itself through tactical genius and raw determination. Today, we're going to witness the complete destruction of Spartan military dominance, a defeat so thorough and so shocking that it sent tremors throughout the Mediterranean world. But to understand the magnitude of what occurred at Leuctra, we must first grasp just how unthinkable Spartan defeat had become to the ancient mind. For over 2 centuries, Sparta had dominated Greek warfare with a military machine unlike anything the world had ever seen. Their warriors weren't simply soldiers, they were the product of the most ruthless training system ever devised. From the age of 7, Spartan boys were torn from their families and subjected to the agoge, a brutal regimen designed to forge them into perfect killing machines. They learned to endure pain without flinching, to fight without fear, and to die without hesitation. The scarlet-cloaked phalanx of Sparta had become synonymous with victory itself. When enemy armies saw the bronze shields and crimson plumes advancing across a battlefield, they often fled before the first spear was thrown. The Spartans had crushed the mighty Athenian Empire, humbled the proud Thebans, and reduced countless city-states to vassalage. Their king, Agesilaus, had campaigned successfully from Asia Minor to the Peloponnese, earning a reputation as the finest general of his generation. The Spartan military system was built on absolute conformity and unwavering discipline. Every warrior knew his place in the phalanx, every movement had been drilled to perfection, and every tactic had been tested in countless battles. Their bronze-tipped spears formed an impenetrable wall of death, while their massive shields locked together to create an advancing fortress of bronze and flesh. For generations, this system had proven unstoppable, but by 371 BCE, cracks were beginning to show in Sparta's seemingly perfect facade. The constant warfare that had brought them dominance was slowly bleeding them dry. Their citizen population had dwindled to dangerously low levels, forcing them to rely increasingly on helots and perioeci, non-citizens whose loyalty could never be completely trusted. The rigid social system that had once been their strength was becoming a weakness as the world around them evolved. More troubling still was the rise of Thebes as a military power. For decades, Thebes had chafed under Spartan domination, their proud city reduced to little more than a Spartan puppet state. But in the years leading up to Leuctra, something extraordinary had been happening in the streets and training grounds of Thebes. A new generation of military leaders had emerged, men who studied Spartan tactics not to copy them, but to find ways to destroy them. At the forefront of this revolution stood Epaminondas, a Theban general whose brilliance would soon reshape the art of war. Unlike the traditional Greek approach of head-on phalanx combat, Epaminondas had been developing radical new tactics that would turn conventional wisdom on its head. He understood that defeating the Spartans would require more than courage. It would demand innovation, surprise, and a willingness to break every established rule of Greek warfare. The genius of Epaminondas lay not just in his tactical innovations, but in his understanding of psychology and timing. He recognized that Sparta's greatest strength, their reputation for invincibility, could become their greatest weakness if that reputation could be shattered decisively enough. A narrow victory wouldn't suffice, only a crushing, undeniable defeat would break the spell of Spartan supremacy. Working alongside Epaminondas was his close companion Pelopidas, a warrior whose personal courage matched his strategic insight. Together, they had been quietly building what would become known as the Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite unit of 150 pairs of male lovers who fought with a ferocity born of their determination to protect their beloved companions. This wasn't merely an army, it was a brotherhood bound by bonds stronger than fear of death. The path to Leuctra had been paved with years of careful preparation and escalating tensions. Sparta's grip on central Greece had been tightening, and their demands for tribute and submission had grown increasingly intolerable to the proud Thebans. A series of diplomatic crises and border skirmishes had gradually pushed the two powers toward inevitable confrontation. The immediate cause of the conflict stemmed from Sparta's insistence on maintaining garrisons in Theban territory, a humiliation that Epaminondas and his faction could no longer endure. When King Cleombrotus led a Spartan army north to reassert Spartan authority over Boeotia, he believed he was embarking on yet another routine campaign to discipline rebellious subjects. He had no idea he was walking into the most sophisticated military trap ever devised. As the two armies converged on the plains near the small town of Leuctra, the contrast between them couldn't have been more striking. The Spartans advanced in their traditional formation, their bronze armor gleaming in the summer sun, their red cloaks flowing behind them like rivers of blood. They numbered approximately 10,000 men, including 700 of the elite Spartiates, full Spartan citizens whose loss would be catastrophic for the state. The Theban army was smaller, perhaps 7,000 men, but it was organized in a way that would have seemed alien to traditional Greek military thinking. Instead of the standard even distribution of forces across the battle line, Epaminondas had concentrated his best troops on the left wing in a formation 50 ranks deep, an unprecedented depth that would become known as the oblique order. This wasn't how Greek battles were supposed to be fought, but that was precisely the point. What made this concentration of force even more revolutionary was its composition. At the heart of the massed left wing stood the Sacred Band, 300 warriors whose dedication to each other created a unit cohesion that surpassed even Spartan discipline. These men didn't fight merely for glory or country, they fought to protect the person they loved most in the world, who stood directly beside them in the battle line. The tactical genius of Epaminondas went beyond mere numbers and positioning. He understood that Greek battles were typically decided by the clash of the right wings, where each army's best troops traditionally fought. By massing his elite forces on the left, he was essentially refusing the traditional battle while concentrating overwhelming force against what the Spartans would consider their weaker flank. It was a gamble that required perfect timing and flawless execution. As the armies drew closer, King Cleombrotus could see something was different about the Theban deployment, but the full implications weren't immediately clear. Spartan scouts reported the unusual depth of the enemy left wing, but such tactical innovations were almost unthinkable within the conservative framework of Spartan military doctrine. How could a deeper phalanx possibly overcome the proven effectiveness of traditional Spartan fighting methods? The morning air grew thick with tension as both armies completed their final preparations. Spartan officers moved through the ranks, offering words of encouragement that had been spoken before countless victories. Theban commanders checked and rechecked the positioning of their revolutionary formation, knowing that everything depended on the next few hours. What neither side could have anticipated was that they were about to participate in one of the most decisive battles in military history, a clash that would end Spartan hegemony forever and usher in a new era of Greek warfare. The tension reached its breaking point as horns echoed across the battlefield, their bronze voices cutting through the morning air like knives. This was the moment when theory would meet reality, when years of preparation would be tested against centuries of tradition. The ground beneath thousands of feet trembled as both armies began their advance. But what unfolded next would defy every expectation held by observers on both sides. Cleombrotus, seasoned by decades of warfare, initially maintained confidence in his traditional approach. The Spartan right wing, where he positioned himself alongside his elite troops, moved forward with the mechanical precision that had terrorized enemies for generations. Each warrior maintained perfect spacing, their massive bronze-faced shields overlapping to form an impenetrable wall of metal and leather. The rhythmic clash of spear shafts against shield rims created a drumbeat of intimidation that had broken enemy morale before the first blow was struck. But Epaminondas had anticipated this psychological warfare. As the Spartan right advanced toward what appeared to be a weaker Theban left, they found themselves facing something unprecedented. The Theban formation wasn't retreating or showing signs of the fear that typically preceded collapse. Instead, the massed ranks of the oblique formation held their ground with an eerie calm that unnerved even veteran Spartan warriors. The first contact came not where Cleombrotus expected, but where Epaminondas had planned. The concentrated Theban left, 50 men deep, struck the Spartan right like a bronze-tipped battering ram. The impact was unlike anything witnessed in previous Greek warfare, where traditional phalanx combat involved relatively even pressure distributed across the entire line. This was focused devastation designed to shatter rather than simply push. The Sacred Band led this assault with a ferocity that transcended normal battlefield courage. These weren't men fighting for abstract concepts of honor or city-state loyalty. Each warrior fought to protect his beloved companion, knowing that failure meant watching the person he cherished most die beside him. This created a level of desperate determination that even Spartan discipline couldn't match. The Spartan right, accustomed to fighting enemies who matched their numbers and depth, suddenly found themselves overwhelmed by the sheer mass of the Theban assault. Warriors who had never retreated in their lives discovered that their traditional tactics were inadequate against this unprecedented concentration of force. The bronze spear points of the Sacred Band punched through Spartan shields with the momentum of an avalanche, creating gaps in a formation that had seemed unbreachable moments before. King Cleombrotus himself became caught in this maelstrom of violence. Contemporary accounts describe how the Spartan king, fighting desperately to rally his men, was struck down by a Theban spear that penetrated his bronze corselet. The sight of their king falling sent shockwaves through the Spartan ranks that no amount of training could have prepared them for. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. What made the situation even more catastrophic for Sparta was the cascade effect of Cleombrotus's death. In Spartan society, the king wasn't merely a military commander, but a semi-divine figure whose presence on the battlefield guaranteed divine favor. His fall didn't just remove tactical leadership, it shattered the spiritual foundation upon which Spartan confidence rested. The Theban breakthrough accelerated as panic spread through the Spartan right. Warriors who had never known defeat found themselves pressed backward by an enemy that seemed to multiply before their eyes. The traditional Spartan response to pressure, closing ranks and fighting harder, proved inadequate against the overwhelming numbers concentrated against them. For the first time in living memory, Spartan warriors began to break formation and flee. This collapse of the Spartan right created exactly the tactical situation Epaminondas had envisioned. With their best troops crushed or retreating, the remainder of the Spartan army found itself exposed to a rolling attack that consumed their battle line section by section. The Theban center, initially held back to avoid premature engagement, now advanced to exploit the gap created by their left wing's success. The speed of the Spartan collapse shocked even the Thebans who had planned it. What should have been a grinding battle of attrition lasting hours was decided in less than an hour of actual combat. The sight of Spartan warriors, men who had been considered superhuman by their enemies, running from the battlefield created a moment of stunned disbelief that rippled across the ancient world. But the true measure of Leuctra's significance lay not just in the tactical defeat, but in its human cost to Sparta. Of the 700 Spartiates who had marched north with Cleombrotus, 400 lay dead on the battlefield. This wasn't merely a military setback. It was a demographic catastrophe from which Sparta would never recover. The citizen class that formed the backbone of Spartan society had been decimated in a single afternoon. The aftermath of the battle revealed the full extent of Epaminondas's genius. He had achieved something that centuries of enemies had failed to accomplish, not just defeating a Spartan army, but destroying the myth of Spartan invincibility so completely that it could never be restored. Word of the defeat spread across Greece with unprecedented speed, carried by messengers who could barely believe what they were reporting. In Athens, crowds gathered in the agora to hear the impossible news repeated again and again. In Corinth, oligarchs who had collaborated with Sparta suddenly found themselves reconsidering their allegiances. Across the Peloponnese, Helot populations who had lived under Spartan dominance for centuries began to whisper of freedom for the first time in generations. The revolutionary nature of Epaminondas's tactics extended far beyond their immediate success. Military theorists across the Greek world began studying the oblique order, recognizing that traditional concepts of battlefield deployment had been fundamentally challenged. The concentration of force at a decisive point, rather than even distribution across the entire line, would influence military thinking for centuries to come. More profound still was the demonstration that innovation could triumph over tradition, that military systems considered perfect could be rendered obsolete by creative thinking and bold execution. The lesson wasn't lost on ambitious generals from Macedonia to Syracuse, all of whom began experimenting with new formations and tactics inspired by the Theban victory. The political earthquake triggered by Leuctra reshaped the entire Greek world almost immediately. Sparta's network of alliances, built on the assumption of Spartan military supremacy, began crumbling as former allies rushed to distance themselves from the fallen hegemon. Thebes, previously a secondary power, suddenly found itself courted by city-states eager to align with the new dominant force in Greek politics. The blood-soaked plains of Leuctra had witnessed something that would echo through the corridors of history for millennia to come. In a single afternoon, the seemingly impossible had become reality. The invincible had been vanquished, the eternal victors had tasted the bitter ash of defeat, and the natural order of the Greek world had been turned upside down forever. What Epaminondas achieved that July day transcended mere military victory. He had demonstrated that genius could triumph over tradition, that innovation could shatter even the most entrenched systems of power, and that no empire, no matter how mighty, was immune to the forces of change. The Sacred Band and their revolutionary tactics had not simply won a battle, they had rewritten the very rules of warfare itself. The fall of Sparta at Leuctra reminds us that throughout history, the greatest transformations often come not from gradual evolution, but from moments of explosive change when old certainties crumble and new possibilities emerge. In our own time, when established powers seem unshakable and conventional wisdom appears absolute, the story of that fateful day in Boeotia serves as a powerful reminder that even the mightiest can fall, and that true innovation often comes from those bold enough to reject the way things have always been done. The echoes of bronze clashing on bronze have long since faded, but the lesson remains as sharp as a Theban spear point, that history belongs not to the strongest, but to the most adaptable.